Sean Gathright had no part in the shootings that took place here in Tampa. He was a barely 18-year-old young man who found himself caught up in a whirlwind here in Tampa. He found himself caught up in something that, as you've heard about for these last 5 weeks, he had no part in, ever. And as the evidence has shown you, and as I'm going to describe in further detail, he did nothing to knowingly assist anyone in carrying out these shootings that took place in Tampa. The state's case, like any criminal case really, can be looked at like a jigsaw puzzle. And law enforcement's job and the state attorney's job is to try to put the pieces together. Ultimately, it's your job to decide if they fit. It's a puzzle I'm sure all of us have at some point. You know, there are times when you see a piece, it looks like it should fit in this spot. Colors seem to be the same, the shape is similar, but then you try to jam it in there and it doesn't fit. And that's the nature of jigsaw puzzles. This is why they're fun. Sean Gathright is one of those puzzle pieces. And that's the reason we have the system we have. That's why you all are here. Our system of justice is not perfect, but it's the best one the world has ever seen. And one of the reasons for that is we have protections to ensure people are not wrongfully convicted. One of those protections is to hold the state to the burden of proving to you beyond every reasonable doubt that a person is guilty. Now, it's convenient where Mr. Gonzalez left off talking about reasonable doubt. That's where I'm going to start. You'll hear many instructions on the law tomorrow, but one of them will be a definition of reasonable doubt. And our state, I would suggest, has a strange way of defining reasonable doubt, because it starts off first by defining what it's not before it defines what it is. And we may have discussed this instruction in jury selection weeks ago, but you'll hear tomorrow that reasonable doubt is not a mere possible doubt, speculative, imaginary, or forced doubt. Such a doubt must not influence you to return a verdict of not guilty if you have an abiding conviction of guilt. On the other hand, and this is when it begins defining reasonable doubt, if after carefully considering, comparing, and weighing all the evidence, there's not an abiding conviction of guilt, or if you have a conviction and it is not one that is stable but which wavers and vacillates, then the charge has not been proven beyond every reason. The instruction, as Mr. Gonzalez told you, goes on to say a couple sentences later that reasonable doubt can arise from the evidence, lack of evidence, and conflicts in the evidence. I'm going to try to frame my argument on those three areas. I'm going to start by talking about the evidence and conflicts in the evidence, because they kind of go hand in hand in this case, I would suggest. And I want to start talking about the phone records, because you heard a lot about phone records. All kinds of phone records, frankly. One thing I want to remind you all is that Mr. Gathright's phone is never actually collected in evidence. Law enforcement is relying on cell tower records and iCloud search warrant returns. But the one thing I want to talk about a little bit is the phone mapping, because you've heard a lot about that from a couple of different witnesses. You first heard about it from Detective Klein, who he was tasked with going out and trying to corroborate where there were certain cell tower hits. And he himself told you that this is often a guessing game. It's an estimation based on records that the phone companies keep for their own purposes to try to maximize their coverage areas. One of the things you heard about was timing advance and call detail records. And I'm showing you, by the way, this is a print screen from State's Exhibit 77. You'll probably remember I had difficulty playing it. We had to wait 5 minutes for it to catch up, so I'm not going to, it's already a long day, so I'm not going to go there. But you all will have that in the back with you when you're delivering. You can watch it. It's much easier to play on a computer than on these, on the system we have here. But this is a print screen that stops that at 4:45 a.m. and you'll see that it has timed hits, and this is Mr. Gathright's phone number, hits that span about 4:34 to 4:45, so right in between when the shootings take place. You'll see that there are multiple hits in this area around the time of the shooting. But at the same time, at 4:39, the phone is hitting on the northern sector of this phone tower, which encompasses the Airbnb. It's also just south of Fletcher Avenue, far to the north of the shooting scene. If you recall when Detective Ramos described this area, and it's really everything involved in this case goes from just north of Fletcher, south to Bush, basically between Nebraska and just past McKinley. But right in between the Airbnb and the shooting is the entire USF campus. So as he described, to go between the two, you either have to go through USF or go around this way. So these hits, I believe, suggest to you, and I'll show you another one that is a print screen from 454, which is a little after the homicide. And here we have phones bouncing off towers over that entire area. I show you this to emphasize clearly these records are not reliable to pinpoint a location, because within this span, phone is hitting all over that entire area within just about a 10-minute span. But the one thing that you can be pretty certain of with these records, and Detective Ramos even described that, the towers have three sectors. And while it's an estimate to say where the phone may be within the range of the tower, the one thing that we can be pretty sure of is that it's within one of the three sectors of the tower. And if you look closely at these phone hits, they're basically almost all, if not all, on the northern sector of these towers. There's a couple on the eastern or western sides, which will cover some of the northern area, but almost all are on the northern sectors of the towers. And that's very important because of this tower right here. Because we know the tower is right here in this area on the USF campus, and really on the northern side of the USF campus. And the phone is hitting on the northern sector of it within seconds of when the shooting's taking place. Now you may be saying, well, how are these other hits taking place down here? Well, again, they're on the northern sides of the towers. So it's perfectly reasonable that the phone could be further away but connecting to the strongest signal, which could be one of these, but it cannot reasonably be south of this tower because it would not be hitting that sector of the tower. And that's the one thing we know. Again, you'll have this back there. You'll have the actual PowerPoint. Play it. Watch. Take a look closely at where these phones are hitting. It shows you not only how unreliable it is to suggest these tower records can give you specific locations, but pay attention to the sector that's being hit. Because there's no explanation, and you haven't heard an explanation for how we're on the northern side of that sector right when the shooting has just taken place. Now, a lot was also taken out of the phone, I guess you could say, but really from the iCloud search warrant. And the state has kind of picked certain pieces of evidence to highlight and suggest it's indicative of guilt. I'm asking you to look at the full picture, pay attention to the times, and pay close attention to really all the evidence surrounding these things that have been pulled out of the phone. You heard about, and frankly I'm not even sure why, but you heard about Mr. Gathright's Instagram account, but Detective Ramos himself said there was really nothing of relevance from his Instagram account. There was from some others, but not from Mr. Gathright's. Something else you'll see in looking at the phone records is there's very little communication between Mr. Gathright and any of the co-defendants, with the exception of Mr. Chance, who is a friend, but again, almost no communication between him and either of the Murphys or anyone else who's alleged to have been involved in this alleged conspiracy. One of the things, though, that you've heard about a lot is the one text message from Rashad Murphy to Mr. Gathright. And again, this is another example of, you look at that puzzle piece with a cursory glance, maybe it looks like it's going to fit. But here's what I want you to pay attention to about that, and this is why it doesn't fit. That text is allegedly sent to Mr. Gathright in response to the conversation that Isaiah Chance is having with Charles Jones and some other people online. And what is said is, first, we got bigger S to tend to. And then Rashad Murphy is saying, they ain't worth our energy. This is in response to Chance talking to Charles Jones and his entourage. Rashad Murphy himself is saying, they ain't worth our energy. That is not suggesting it has anything to do with Charles Jones. That's suggesting it doesn't have anything to do with Charles Jones, because he's saying those people that Chance is talking to are not worth our energy. There's a suggestion that it's something saying that Sean Gathright is part of some plot, but when you peel back the layers, it actually suggests the exact opposite. Now, what else do we know about that? That text is sent on June 8th. There is never an announcement about Julio Foolio performing in Tampa until June 14th. This is 6 days before there's ever any announcement made that there's going to be a Julio performance in Tampa. So it makes absolutely no sense that that text message, when you look at the full context, has anything to do with this alleged conspiracy. Now, what else do we know from the evidence? That flyer advertised the performance was going to be from 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. Okay. There is the screen record that you've heard about that was in the iCloud dump, and it's taking place after 8 p.m. It's taking place after, as you've heard, the pool party was supposed to be 5 to 6 p.m. Teasers was supposed to start at 8. This is happening long after Teasers was supposed to have begun. And if Mr. Gathright is allegedly targeting Charles Jones to try to shoot him, everyone knows where he's going to be at 3 a.m. Yeah, Detective Ramos said, performers come late, and I'm sure most of us who've been to a concert know that. But Julio Foolio is the headliner. The club's going to close at 3 o'clock. Everyone knows where he's going to be at 3 a.m. So why would Mr. Gathright, if he is trying to shoot Charles Jones, why would he put all this effort into trying to find out where he's at, leading up to the show at Teasers, where he knows Charles Jones will be at 3 a.m.? Very similar to the text messages with Kyle Landry. Again, look at the full context of this. Okay. And I'm glad Ms. Doherty said that it doesn't matter who Fat Boy is, because there was never a Fat Boy identified in Charles Jones' entourage. Detective Ramos came to believe it was Xavier Edwards because Robert Howard, I guess, said that he himself calls him that sometimes. But as you heard, Detective Ramos previously testified, he's never identified anyone by the name of Fat Boy at that party. But again, look at the full picture. Those text messages are beginning around 1:30 a.m. The entourage is kicked out of the B&B, Airbnb after that. They're starting long before that ever happens. So, and again, by this point, Charles Jones is expected to be at Teasers. And ultimately, that's what Kyle Enright was told. He's going to Teasers. So, why is it being asked of Ms. Enright about 6? Assuming 6 is Charles Jones? Don't know, but it doesn't make any sense that would be anything to do with a plot to shoot him, because everyone knows where he's supposed to be at that point. And again, if Mr. Gathright is intending to shoot Charles Jones, why on earth would he bring someone in let them know that that he's looking for Charles Jones, someone who has no dog in this fight, and just create another witness. It makes no sense, especially when you consider, again, everyone knows where Charles Jones is going to be at that time of night. Now, what else do we see from the phone? 2:31, there are 2 texts to his phone, Mr. Gathright's phone, from Alicia Andrews' phone, saying, pick up your effing phone. There's been some suggestion that everyone is communicating on some special app that can't be tracked. But there's no evidence of that. That's a theory. But ask yourselves this. Why, if that's happening, why go back and forth? Why would you not communicate on the secretive app the entire time? Why are you going to send a text message in addition to that? Why are you going to make a phone call in addition to that? Because there is a phone call after that, very short, I'm not even sure if it connects. And then there's nothing again until the next morning with Mr. Gathright's phone and Alicia's phone. And similarly, we have seen evidence that Alicia Andrews shares her location with Mr. Gathright. But if Mr. Gathright is part of this whole conspiracy, why would she be doing that? Again, you heard and you even saw a video that this Impala is right outside Truth 18, right before it goes to the home to suites. If Mr. Gathright is in that Impala, they're following the entourage. Okay. And we know it's right in the area of that home to suites. Yeah, the cruise pulls into the parking lot before, but the Impala is right in that area. And the Impala, if they're following this person they're going to shoot, knows where it's going to be. They followed it right to that area. So if Mr. Gathright is in there, ready to shoot Charles Jones, why does Alicia need to share the location? And again, one thing that none of this can explain is why is that phone hitting a tower on the north side of the USF campus? Let me talk a little more now about the videos that we see from the home to suites and the Tesla. None of those videos, and I should say even before that point, there is no evidence of who got in that Impala. Okay? Frankly, there's not even evidence of how many people are in that Impala. You heard Detective Ramos' theory of who's in there, but there was no evidence showing who got in that Impala before it's at home to suites. When it gets to the home to suites, you don't see who gets out of it or where they get out of it to know who is sitting where within the car or how many people are even in the car. You'll see the videos, as you have several times now already. You can't tell who gets out of where in that car. And then you never see people getting back in the car, and you never see that Impala leaving. You've heard a lot of theory as to who the shooters are and what you can allegedly tell from the video. You've heard Detective Ramos allege that he can make out a light skin tone of one of the shooters, and he claims that person is Mr. Gathright. I think this is one of the spots. I want you to pay close attention and compare these still shots to the actual video, because the video is the video is very clear. These still shots are great. But it was pointed out to you, you can see this looks like a light skin tone. Look at the bottom side of this banana leaf. Look at the side of the pole. We know there's a landscape light right there. It makes everything that it hits look lighter. When you watch the video, you'll see that as shooter number 1 runs by this light, his skin looks just as pale as the person in this photo. You can't make out anything about skin tone from these still shots or that video. But again, compare these to the video. What else are we able to see from the video? You get a very good look at the firearm that shooter 2 is holding in the video. Again, there are screenshots pulled out. The video, you see this fire. In fact, it stops right before shots are fired. And you can see for a full, probably 2 seconds, that very gun before it's fired. You can make it out very clearly. I would suggest to you, people can look at photos over and over again and begin to see things that are not there. Detective Ramos told you he's looked at this countless times. He's come to believe that this rifle matches the rifle in evidence, which, if I may approach.
Sure.
Showing you the actual rifle that Mr. Gathright is alleged to be holding in that photo, 56 feet. You'll have all this back there. If you recall, Deputy DeJesus, he was the alleged firearms expert. One of the instructions you're going to get tomorrow, by the way, is on weighing the evidence and different factors you can and should consider. One of them is, was the witness honest and straightforward in answering the defendant's or the lawyer's questions? I would suggest Detective Jesus was not very straightforward in answering my questions, but one thing he was really straightforward about is that this sight is fixed. This is not something you can flip down. Okay? And this is a pretty big, you'll have this back there to look at. This is a pretty significant piece of metal, the front sight. It is not on the rifle that is being held there. Okay? And you really can see it when you look. I'll flip through a couple more screenshots, but you really can see that when you watch the video. Just the same. The hand grip, much wider. The angle of the barrel coming off this does not match what you see in that video. There's a sight that is not on this rifle. And I would suggest to you, when you look at the top piece, this handle on the top, it doesn't match what you see in that video. But you'll have all of this, and you can compare it yourselves. Look at it. There's no question, this is not that rifle. That, by the way, the one I was showing you is 139 in. There's quite a few still shots where you can see this, but again, the video shows it better than anything. 139S, again, can't make out the sight. Does not match the shape of that rifle we just saw. 139K, probably an even better angle as far as the still shots, what we can see of that rifle. Again, pay attention to everything on top. And again, 139M, shape doesn't match. Now, what have we heard about the day after the shooting as it relates to Mr. Gathright? The next afternoon, I think it's at 3:11, he is going in the Airbnb. And he's by himself. Everyone else, I'm not sure if they've left yet at that point, but everyone else leaves and goes to Jacksonville. Mr. Gathright is there by himself in Tampa. And he's asking for the code to be let in. Now, the state, again, is at a theory of who has gone into that Airbnb, the one that is north of USF. But there is no evidence of how many people or who has gone in and out of that place, because everyone has been going in the back door. And it's not unreasonable that people would do that. As you saw from the photos, there's a side parking lot right on the side of that particular unit. And if you park on that side, the back door is as close as the front door to get in. And the back door is much wider. And if multiple people are going in and out over the course of a weekend, the back door can be left open while the front door cannot. Because as you heard, the front door requires a code to get in. So the state has a theory as to how many people had stayed in that Airbnb, but there's no evidence to suggest how many people could have gone in and out during that night. But what we also know, aside from that, Mr. Gathright goes on to his grandmother's house in Polk County. and then he goes on to his sister's party in Orlando. And that had been, his plan the entire weekend. He's going to his grandmother's house, switch out cars for his business, his pressure washing business, and then he's going to Orlando for the sister's party. And unfortunately, he came to Tampa on the way, apparently with his friend Isaiah Chance, without any idea what was going to be happening in Tampa. But this alleged tampering with physical evidence charge, which is count 6, is alleged to have taken place when he goes to Polk County. And as you heard, one of the elements that you're going to be asked to decide is whether Sean Gathright altered, destroyed, concealed, removed any item with the purpose to impair its availability in a basically criminal proceeding. There is nothing that he does to conceal, remove, destroy any evidence. Again, there's a theory that apparently he is wiping down the inner door handles, and by doing that, and then by leaving the car with his grandmother, he has now tampered with physical evidence. But again, step back and look at the big picture. The car is owned by his mother. No question about that. Clearly that's going to trace back to him. And he's leaving it with his grandmother. It doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to find out where that car may be if they're looking at Sean Gathright. So there's nothing concealing about leaving it at the grandmother's house. And as you heard, the grandmother's driving. It's not like it's being hid inside the garage, never to be seen again. The next day, very next day, law enforcement finds it. And to suggest that Mr. Gathright is tampering with the car by wiping down the door handles makes no sense. If he is trying to wipe off fingerprints or DNA, why only do the inner door handles? People get inside a car, don't touch just the interior door handle. The steering wheel is probably the most touched, at least by the driver. That's never wiped down. And in fact, as you saw from the evidence, after the door handle's been wiped down on the inside, or the interior door's been wiped down, Mr. Gathright gets back in it and moves the car. So he's clearly leaving any evidence of himself within the car. And if he's trying to get rid of evidence of who's been sitting in the car, wiping off the doors is not going to help. Because clearly, people are going to be touching many, many areas inside the car. And even though, if you would suggest, well, why do that? I'd suggest why is because he's cleaning for his grandmother. But if you're trying to get rid of evidence, why do you leave the rag right there in the garage? As you heard, law enforcement collected that very rag. So while it could have, I guess, wiped off fingerprints, number one, it would still leave fingerprints in many areas. But if it's DNA, the rag's right there to test. So to suggest that is altering, destroying, concealing, and removing evidence is a major stretch that the law does not support. So, as you've heard, Mr. Gathright goes on to Orlando. Now again, he's by himself in Orlando. None of the people who have been in Tampa are with him in Orlando. In fact, they have gone back to Jacksonville, and at least one of them has actually gone inside his house, by the way, while he's in Orlando. You saw, again, this is stuff that's pulled from the phone, and there's, I think, a suggestion that Mr. Gathright taking pictures of Don Julio is somehow indicative of guilt. You have seen Don Julio is everywhere in this case, on both sides. Charles Jones's entourage is drinking Don Julio. They're drinking Don Julio at the pool party. It's in their cars. Taking a picture of Don Julio does not suggest he had some part in Charles Jones's homicide. And trying to make such a stretch is a dangerous thing to do. I'd also point out to you, there's no evidence, and he did not send these videos to anybody. It's not like being sent to the other alleged conspirators to say, hey, let's celebrate. These are videos that are just in his phone that he apparently took, or someone took from his phone. The other thing that's in the phone that I would suggest to you that's important is this allegation that he is making a gang sign. And you have heard all about gang signs during these last few weeks. The one thing you have consistently heard, though, is Mr. Gathright was not known to any of these gang detectives in Jacksonville. He's never been documented as a member of the gang, and none of the Jacksonville detectives ever even knew who he was until Tampa contacts them. Now, you heard, and you will have the video back there, and I'd suggest to you, the video of this alleged gang sign is being thrown up is literally so fast if you blink, you miss it. You'll have it back there to watch. But in any event, as Detective Ramos confirmed, the alleged gang sign has Mr. Gathright putting his ring finger down. Well, in Mr. Foolio's teasers flyer, he's making the very same sign, and he's clearly not a member of 1200, because that's been the whole theme of this trial. If you also noticed, every witness who told you about the 1200 sign, initially, every witness said the 1200 sign is putting the middle finger down. Every one of them said that until I brought up with Ramos, Detective Ramos, that Mr. Gathright has the ring finger down. And then you hear Detective Griffin say, oh, no, it can be the ring finger or the middle finger. Every other alleged expert, every other alleged gang member said, no, it's the middle finger. Until I said ring. Now it can be both. I want to show you, just briefly, 84A, that chart of the alleged 1200 members. Every one of them has the middle finger down. Again, it's kind of neither here nor there. Mr. Guthright's not alleged to be a gang member. There's been no evidence that he is. But every little piece of evidence from that phone that could be picked out has been thrown in front of you. And that's grasping at straws. Finding that sign that is not a 1200 sign being thrown for a flash second in a club that he's at for his sister's birthday party. Okay. So what else do we know about Mr. Gathright? Traffic stop is conducted later in Jacksonville. There is nothing in that car that connects back to the shooting in Tampa. And the detectives confirmed. Now, there's a vast amount of firearms material inside the car. And I'm sure when law enforcement made that stop and they found all that stuff, probably thought it was a gold mine. Because again, they're trying to jam that puzzle piece into the puzzle. And this sure makes it look like it fits. Because there's a 9mm in there, there's 9mm ammo, all sorts, there's rifle casings, there's rifle ammo, but none of it connects back to the shooting tank, including the 9mm handgun. And we know a 9mm fired at least 31 rounds, but it wasn't that one. And what else is in that car? This is some loose ammo, especially the rifle ammo, consistent with someone who would reload ammunition, as you heard about. The only thing of relevance to the case, to alleged relevance anyway, is that there's a group of casings fired, 223 and 556 casings, one of which matches back to a casing from the group that was collected when Julio Foolio was shot in the foot many, many months before in October. Again, the one thing that and I'll talk about this some more when we talk about what's in the house, but the one thing that the examiner told you, not one thing, but one critical thing she told you, is she can't say when any of these casings were fired. All she can say is they're fired from the same handgun, or the same, in this case, rifle. Could be 5 years apart. That was her testimony. There's nothing else connecting Mr. Gathright to that shooting. And what's critical about that is Jacksonville has been investigating that since the prior October. And again, remember, they didn't know anything about Sean Gathright. So there's been no evidence he had anything to do with that shooting. And better believe those Jacksonville detectives, I'm sure that was high on their priority list, when the most high-profile rapper in Jacksonville was shot, they're going to try to figure out who did it. And they didn't know anything about Sean Gathright. So move ahead to the search of the house, which happened shortly thereafter. And again, this is a house Mr. Gathright shares with his mother, the retired Marine, who I'd suggest she was an avid shooter based on the evidence. But the plethora of firearms and firearms material are found within that house. And again, and by this point, by the way, law enforcement doesn't have any forensic testing back from what's found in the car. They probably think they are continuing down this trail and that this gold mine is just getting deeper and deeper. Because there is a massive amount of firearms material in the house. None of it's illegal to own, by the way. But I'm sure law enforcement thinks, man, this puzzle piece really looking right. When all this is tested, again, it doesn't fit. You heard about this cardboard in the sink, and I think there was some suggestion that Mr. Gathright, or someone is trying to get rid of things that were used in the homicide. But you heard from the technician who pulled all that out. She dried it off, tried to find any labels she could. She basically figured out what all those boxes corresponded to. But none of them connect back to anything used in the shooting. There's a drum magazine, I think a couple drum magazines even. Clearly none of the rifles or handguns used in the homicide have a drum magazine, because you would be able to see that clear as day. There's a Glock chassis, which is apparently something that can convert a Glock into like a rifle. There's no evidence of that being used. There's a red dot sight box, no evidence of that being used. So whatever's in the sink, again, probably at first glance looks like, oh man, they must be trying to get rid of evidence. But when you actually look at what's in there, none of that matches back to Tampa. Same thing with what's in the safe. There's a 9mm again in the safe. Doesn't connect back to this shooting. There are several firearms, but there are two that apparently law enforcement thinks must be involved in the Tampa shooting. And those are the two that we have in evidence, the one I just brought up here. One of those, the 5.56, and I would point out, by the way, you heard a lot of testimony about, no projectiles were collected, they were all broken up, couldn't be tested. But the examiner told you she had 18 projectiles that she was able to test because they had rifling, including a couple intact bullets. So 18 different projectiles. 16 are completely eliminated from having been fired from that gun, the 5.56. 2 of them are inconclusive. Okay. And you heard that at FDLE they have inconclusive plus, inconclusive minus, or an inconclusive. Those 2 were not inconclusive plus, they were inconclusive. She can't say they were fired from it or they weren't fired from it. No evidence either way to suggest either of the 2 projectiles that couldn't be eliminated came from that gun. You'd be being asked to speculate that that could have been one of thousands of 5.56 that could have fired those projectiles. One of which we don't even know is the same caliber. What else do we know about those guns? The 300 blackout, every projectile is eliminated from that gun. Nothing matches back to that 300 blackout. Again, look at, I think it's shooter number 3 who's alleged to carry that. Compare it. You can't see his as well as the other 2, but it's not used in this shooting. And there's not even any indication of a 30 caliber anything is used in this shooting. Now, why else is that significant? Because you heard from a DNA examiner who came in here. And she testified, the only DNA that really was found in any evidence in this case was from a wrap that was on that 300 blackout, a wrap that was on the handle. She found 4 profiles, and potentially could have even been more because, as you heard, they basically limit their findings to 4. One of them is consistent with Mr. Gathright. The gun's in his house, that's not unreasonable. But what's important to remember is the state's not claiming he held the 300 blackout. Their theory is that he held the 5.56, the one I just showed you, that doesn't match what you see in the video, by the way. But regardless, the 300 he's never alleged to be holding in the shooting. But that's the only place the DNA comes from. That also is the one that has the brass catcher. Now again, I'm sure you all have been saying, well, there's those two casings in there. And that's true. You heard the examiner say, two casings that are found within the house were fired from the same firearm, the same 9mm that fired the one, I guess, 9mm that she was given the test. Remember, the examiner was only given one of the 9mm casings. The rest, the other 30, were sent to ATF for their specialized DNA testing process. So she only had one to compare. Very well could have been more than one 9mm used, and I'd suggest to you there was because of the rifling that's seen. But in any event, what do we know about that? Again, the examiner can't say when the two 9mm casings found in the gun safe were fired. Could have been 5 years apart. What's really critical to keep in mind is they are different brands. Now, there's been a lot made about the fact that Max Tech 9mm casings, or rounds rather, are in the Forerunner when it's searched in Jacksonville. I'm showing you, for the record, what's 48. I believe that's an LL or II. But again, that's the two boxes of Max Tech 9mm ammo that's found within the Forerunner. But look at 44mm. One of those boxes is entirely full. The other one has all but two shells out of it. Now these wouldn't be, and you're probably saying, well, there's two found in the case. Right, but they're not Max Tech. The ones found in the gun safe are federal brands, which clearly is is further indication those were not fired at the same time in Tampa. But I'll get back to that in a moment. Another thing Detective DeJesus, I would suggest, was actually straightforward with me about is that Max Tech is a pretty common brand of ammo. And it's pretty common because it's one of the cheaper brands. So to suggest that Mr. Gathright must have been connected to the Tampa shooting because he has Max Tech 9mm boxes in his car makes no sense, especially when they're almost completely full and there are 31 fired casings back at the scene. Number 31, by the way, is pretty important. Because as you heard from Detective Ramos, when he found the two casings himself, or he heard about them in being found in the gun safe in Jacksonville, he himself thought, and even put it in his report, those two must have been fired at another time. Because he didn't even think it was possible to get a round or a magazine that would hold more than 30 rounds. He himself thought those must have been fired at a different time. He learned that apparently you can get a 32 round clip, but a 30 is going to be much more common. He didn't even know a 32 existed. And when you think about the fact that, again, every single one of the 31 casings is a Max Tech, and the two in the safe are Federals, it's consistent with what Detective Ramos initially thought. These had to have been fired at a different time. Another reason that makes sense is, hypothetically, and I think you heard a theory that, you know, the 9mm must have flown into the brass catcher at some point. That doesn't make a lot of sense. When you look at, for instance, 8C, and these are markings of where most of those casings are found, they're all up here by the entrance to Home to Suites. I'll show you 8G, same thing, it's that from another angle. And when you compare this to the video, you see that the shooter with a 9mm, or with a handgun, presumably 9mm, is standing right about here. Maybe moves up a little bit. Nowhere near either one of the people with the other firearms. So, based on that alone, it makes no sense that firing the 9mm would have incidentally just shot two of the casings into the brass catcher in one of the rounds. But even if you think, well, maybe that happened, why on earth would someone get rid of all the other brass that's fired in Tampa and just leave these two there? Two that don't match anything else. It makes no sense. It makes no sense because it didn't happen. What does make sense is those two were fired, apparently from the same firearm, but a long time before, not connected to what happens in Tampa. And another thing that's not been explained is what happens when the people in the Uber get to Jacksonville. Well, Sean Gathright is in the way. I don't know. But we know people are going into that house. You see it on the video. Now, we talked a lot about evidence, about lack of evidence. No motive whatsoever for Mr. Gathright to want to shoot Charles Jones. And as Ms. Doherty said this morning, and is absolutely true, the state doesn't have to prove motive. It's not an element. But it's sure something you can consider. Because you're going to be asked to decide if he's the person he says he is in the context of this case. If he's one of the people who caused the death of Charles Jones. And that goes to identity. And motive is very much something you can consider, and you sure should consider, in deciding if Sean Gathright did the things the state says he did. He has no reason to want to shoot Charles Jones. You heard that this motivation for the shooting goes back to all these prior shootings between the two gangs. Remember, he's barely 18 when this happens. If you look back at the dates of this, I mean, he's a child when these other shootings were taking place. And he has no connection to it. It's not like, he's related to these people who were shot in the prior shootings, that, his parents were gang members in the past. There's no connection. It's like he drops in out of the blue one day and is literally in the middle of a gang war. He's not part of the drill rap scene. There's no evidence Charles Jones even knows who he is, let alone anybody else who's in that entourage. It makes no sense. The puzzle piece doesn't fit. And that's absolutely something that you can and should consider. What else is lacking in evidence? The guns, none of the guns are found that are used in the shooting. I mean, there's a stretch to suggest maybe that 5.56 over here was used. I think I've shown that it wasn't. 9mm, surely not. There's no connection to the 300. And there's nothing beyond literal speculation that the 5.56 was used in the shooting. None of the clothing is found that was used in the shooting. There's no DNA from anything at the scene. And that's despite the fact that the ATF, as you heard, has this procedure for testing DNA on casings. One thing I want to point out before I move on to some other topics briefly is that Mr. Gathright is charged with 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder, just like both of the Murphys are. And those counts correspond to an alleged attempted murder of Xavier Edwards, Gino Norris, and Camilla Bentley. It's an allegation that it's first-degree premeditated murder, which means whoever is allegedly committing the attempted first-degree murder has to intend to try to murder these people, not Charles Jones. Even if, hypothetically, whoever sets out to shoot Charles Jones, there's no evidence there's an intent to want to kill Xavier Edwards, Gino Norris, or Camilla Bentley. You haven't even heard from Xavier Edwards, by the way. But in any event, an incidental shooting, as occurred with these 3 unfortunate individuals, cannot be premeditated. If someone tries to shoot Charles Jones and a couple of other people are incidentally hit, that is a crime, but it's not first-degree premeditated murder because the people did not intend to shoot the 3 people who were shot. That's premeditation. You'll get instructions on what that is. We talked about it, and I'm not going to belabor the point because really, as it pertains to Mr. Gathright, it's neither here nor there because he's not one of the shooters. But in any event, keep that in mind. They're charged with attempted premeditated murder as to those 3. One thing I added in my notepad when Ms. Doherty was arguing is, in discussing the attempts, you talked about this being and it was an eloquent argument, by the way, But the suggestion that this is so well planned out and these people are well trained, take a look at the video. It is amazing those shooters did not shoot each other. Because you've got shooter number 2 under the tree. Right across from that, you have shooter number 3 in the car line as Charles Jones's car is driving between them, and they're both shooting back at each other. Meanwhile, shooter number 1 is presumably running back into the gunfire. To suggest that was some well planned out offense is kind of a wild theory. And again, it's kind of amazing none of the shooters shot themselves or shot each other. So, ladies and gentlemen, the evidence, when you peel it back and look, Sean Gathright is a young man who got himself caught up in something in Tampa. Probably didn't realize the extent of it until afterwards. Something that made no sense for him to be connected to. There was no connection between him and all of this that's taking place here in Tampa. I'm going to take my seat in just a moment, and to echo something Mr. Gonzalez said again, whether Ms. Doherty, Ms. Ismer, or Mr. Harmon, one of them will be able to get up and give a rebuttal argument after we've all argued. I can't get back up. As you heard, those are the rules. Again, this will probably go on for another 5 weeks if we didn't make the attorney stops. But I want to leave you with a thought, and it goes back again to the reasonable doubt instruction. I want you to follow that instruction. Carefully consider, compare, and weigh all the evidence. Look at the context of the evidence you're being shown to suggest Sean Gathright had anything to do with these shootings. Compare it all and weigh it all. You will see Sean Gathright is a puzzle piece that doesn't fit in that puzzle. You might look at first glance, and again, I bet law enforcement, when they searched that house, they searched that car, they thought, man, we got that puzzle piece. But look at all the evidence. It doesn't fit. And it makes no sense that he would have involved himself in this shooting. It makes no sense because he's not guilty. He's not guilty of any of these charges, and certainly not guilty of tampering with any evidence. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take my seat. Mr. Gathright, this fate's in your hands.